And that recording will go out after this session and will be available for anybody that wasn't able to attend today. So I did mention that I was wanting to point out the training site. So in your function point system, up at the top right, you are going to see a little question mark, and that is going to allow you to access the training area. So I'd like to show this off. The training area, and I prefer to go into the FP library, the mothership of how-tos. This is where you're going to find information on all the modules organized by what they do, companies and contacts, notes, briefs, estimates, jobs, schedules, projects, all that stuff. And with a good search functionality, so there's documents, cheat sheets, workflows, videos, webinar recordings, everything that you might need, and a good search functionality. So what's one I like to show off? How to submit staff expenses. Even if I spell a word wrong, let's see if I still get it. So I really thought I was going to get that, even though I spelled that wrong. There we go. Well, it's not actually pulling up at the top. Normally that'd be right at the top, though. Let's just search staff expenses. There's staff expenses. So I mean, it might take you 1 or 2 tries, but no matter what you're searching for, you're going to be able to find it in the help site. Next thing I want to show off really quickly is the product request area, the feature requests. Please do feel free to submit feature requests. We do take them very seriously. We do log them. We do look at them all. They don't just go into the ether. And we are very actively working on a way of bringing those requests to the forefront so that we have more visibility into what those requests are for all of our clients, and you can see some responses. I know that our product team is working hard to respond to many of those, but we're trying to make that more visible. So please, please, please do feel free to send those feature requests. And the last thing, I'm kind of getting carried away here. I know we got to jump into it. The last thing I want to show really quickly is we did have a release last night that is just about a preview to the schedules module. If you navigate to a schedule in your system, you're going to see the current schedule. And this may not be the best example because there's not a lot of complexity to it, but you're going to see the current schedule layout, and then on the right side there's a button that says Preview New Schedule. And if you select this, you get a preview of the new scheduling module that's coming out. Now, even this itself is really just the first of many steps. There's a lot of different really cool stuff coming this in the coming months. But this just allows you to see how you can do certain things, like having all the information and being able to side scroll, better, more improved views into things, and a significantly better functionality when this is released. So this is just a bit of a preview. Okay, so let's get started here. We're going to be taking a look at creating a fixed price job and then invoicing that fixed price job. So we're going to go through the creation pretty quickly. It's pretty straightforward. As many of you, of course, know, we're going to start off by adding an estimate. And let's just go ahead and do this for Safeway. So the first step in creating a job is creating an estimate. Now, this may not be an estimate that you present to your client, but it does represent the scope of work structure that you'll be tracking against, and it represents the structure that you'll be using for the purpose of invoicing. So let's say that this is a $10,000 job, and this is going to be the Christmas entrance signs or something like that. So we have Safeway, Christmas. Let's use holiday, super PC. Safeway holiday entrance signs. That's the name of our job. Choose our type. Of course, this would be your own. We're going to choose display and signage. Choose our contact at our clients. Myself as the AE. Our rate category is filled in. If you have different rate categories, you can of course select it. We're going to enter our due date. So they want this done by let's say the 13th of November. Although realistically, they probably would have wanted it done like 3 weeks ago, so they could get it out on November 1st. Then we have the category drop-down. Now this is really important. This is the default list in all new agencies systems. So if you're new to Function Point, this is what you'd find in this list. You of course can customize it in the admin section under list maintenance. It's very important that you label how you intend to bill for this work. In this case, it's fixed price. Now if you want to rename that to be fixed price plus expenses, if you have different types of retainers, that's all fine and well. Just make sure that the category is labeling how you intend to bill this. Some companies do use work type, but the default for how you intend to bill things is the category dropdown. So make sure that that's filled in, even though it's not a required field. We call this branding and design. And let's say that in this case it's going to be, let's just use an easy number. Let's say it's $10,000. So I'm going to choose creative services. I'm going to say, research, design, and copy, and client management. I also have some printing going on, and it's going to be, some printing happening. It's going to be like, let's say, $1,000 worth of printing. Just keeping the numbers easy for me to calculate in my head. Submit that, and that brings us into the details page of the estimate. Now you might be wondering, this is an invoicing webinar. Why is he taking us through estimating? And as I mentioned earlier, it's so important to set up the job in a way that allows you to invoice it correctly later. Now in this case, if I'm doing a job and it's going to be a $10,000 fixed price, I really, really should have the value of the estimate be the value of the fixed price. Now if you don't know, or if you don't care about the hours that you intend to work on these things, feel free to just type in $10,000 into a single line item in the override field. We now have a $10,000 bottom line on this job. As you get more, knowledge and as to, the time it takes, and as you get a bit more sophisticated, I do highly recommend you break that out into the different services. Now, if you know that that's going to be then, $2,000 of research, $3,000 of design, $3,000 of copywriting, and $2,000 of client management, then great, you're getting more, you're planning this out in a bit more of a detailed way. It's going to help in your reporting. If you want to go even further, then the preferred method here would be, of course, to enter the hours that you expect it to take. So, we expected 20 hours of research, 30 of design, 30 of copy, and 20 of client management. And that brings us to our 10,000. Now, let's say that we really only think it's actually going to take us about 15 hours of copywriting, and this client's pretty easy to manage. There's probably only going to be 10 hours of client management, and that brings us to 7,500. But we know that this client is willing to pay us $10,000 plus expenses. Then find another place to put that 2,500. So maybe I want my team to stay within 20 hours of research, but I'm just going to drop in another $1,000 there, bring it up to 3,000. And I really want them to stay within 30 hours of design, but I'm just going to drop another 1,500 in here, and I'm going to bring that up to $10,000. So this bottom line is our fixed price. Enter our expense, so it's going to be $1,000 worth of expenses, and we're going to mark that up by 20%. So it's $10,000 plus expenses, and we're expecting about $1,200 after markup on our printing. Save that. The client has approved it, and we're going to go ahead and add the job. We now have a fixed price job with a value of $10,000 plus $1,200 in expenses, and I can see that in my financials tab, $10,000 of creative services, $1,200 of expenses. And we're ready to go ahead, and we're going to do a fixed price invoice on this job. Before I do, I just want to check in. Sophie, any questions, anything so far? Probably not, but you never know.
You know what? We're actually doing really great over here right now. You've been a lot of detail. It's great. Thank you.
All right. No problem. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is, of course, we're going to invoice this fixed price job. Now, in our example, we're invoicing this for 50% of the $10,000. We're not going to invoice anything for the expense because we haven't incurred it yet. So we're going to invoice 50% of our fixed price of $10,000. So all I'm going to do is up at the top, I'm going to select Add New Invoice. It defaults to interim. This is not a final invoice because we're not done yet. It's just the very first invoice that we're doing on this job. And it's a billing percentage of 50%. Click Add Invoice. And we have an invoice that is 50% of our estimated value. So we can see $5,000 for our internal services. But we did also estimate $1,200 for our expenses, and we haven't incurred any actuals yet. And I don't want to invoice this $600, so I'm just going to delete it out, and that brings us to our $5,000. Save that, and I can produce my client-facing version. So there's my invoice. Of course, yours might look significantly different depending on how you've customized your printouts. So, really simple, really straightforward. you know, you're just invoicing the portions as you need to, and then perhaps we're going to do another 25% later, and then we're going to do another 25% upon completion, and we'll invoice the printing when we get our invoice from our vendor. And as far as how you invoice that printing or the expense when you get your invoice from the vendor, we'll take a look at that when we're doing our fixed price job, which we'll go into now. So the next thing we're going to look at is the process for setting up a time materials job and then putting some time materials against it and invoicing those time materials. We're also going to look at that a second time towards the end of the webinar when we're looking at multi-job invoicing. So in this example, I want to set up another job, but I don't really want to go through the whole process again, for the sake of time and also for the sake of showing off a feature around copying a job structure. And I say the word job structure, really we're copying an estimate, but I like to think of it as like the job structure. So in this case, let's say we're doing another type of job that's going to be really similar to the one we're looking at. It's for a different client, but it's going to be roughly about $10,000, but we're going to invoice them based on the time and expenses that we incur. So I'm just going to click on the estimate here for the one we just created. And up at the top, I'm just going to select copy. So on the estimate details page, select copy, and it copies all the information. In this case, we're going to change it up. I'm going to say that this is for a client called North Shore Auto Group, and this is going to be the new, let's say the new car lot banners. So they're putting together a new lot, and we're going to design and get printed some banners for them. So it's still display signage. It's for our client, North Shore Auto Group. Choose our contact at that client. We want it, let's say we want this one due around, a little bit later, let's say the 19th of November. And the category in this case is fixed, or is time materials. So we're invoicing based on the time and materials that we incur. Now notice that there are no services and expenses, and that is because we are copying the structure of the previous estimate for the sake of time. So we'll submit that, and that brings us to the details page of the estimate, and notice it's exactly what we created a few minutes ago. So let's say in this case, our relationship with this client, we're billing them time and materials for the work that we're doing for them in this particular case, and we expect it to take maybe around $12,000 plus, let's say, $3,000 worth of expenses. So I'm going to take up my overrides here. I expect this to take about 30 hours of research, maybe less. Maybe we'll say about 20 hours of research, but it's going to take about 45 hours of design. It's going to take about 20 hours of copy. Probably, this client's a bit more difficult to manage, so we're going to say 25 hours of client management. Let's see what we have for our fixed price there. So we have 1,100. So I know that I can get 1,200 for this plus the expenses side of things. So I'm just going to bump up, let's say, the copy here to 3,000, and that brings me to 1,200 for my creative services. And then it's probably going to cost about $3,000 to get all these banners printed. They're massive, they're huge, they're really thick too. We got to go to a specialized printer we don't normally work with in order to get this done. So it's going to be expensive. So it's going to cost us $3,000, and we're going to mark this up by a little bit less. So we're going to mark it up by 15%. So my total price now is $15,450. And I can, of course, produce my client-facing version. That is just an estimate. We are going to invoice them based on our incurred time and expenses. So the client has approved this. Mark it as approved. And we're going to choose to add job. So we have our job open. We've estimated $15,450. Now, of course, we need to put some time and expenses against this. So I'm going to do that pretty quickly. This is job 30351. I'm just going to open up my timesheet window here. I'm going to say that, today for job 30351, and we're going to put in some time against research, and I'm just going to put in, let's say, 10 hours. We're then going to put some time against design, and it doesn't matter that I'm going way over the 24 hours that exist in a day. We're going to put in another, let's say, 18 hours here. and then we're going to be putting in some copy. Let's say we have another 6, and then client management, we have 5 hours in there. So we've put a bunch of time against this job. Let's quickly add an expense. Let's say that we've gone ahead and we've gotten we've paid for all of the banners, even though we haven't actually finished the work yet. We paid for everything and we've incurred that expense. We've gotten the invoice from the vendor in advance. So I'm going to choose to add an expense. Now instead of adding an expense from the main navigation bar, I'm actually just going to look at my financials tab, and on my printing expense, I'm going to click the plus icon from the financials tab, and that's going to bring me to the exact same external expense add page. It's just going to automatically fill in the job, the expense type, quantity, and the rate, and the markup percentage. All I need to do is choose who my supplier is. So we're working with a company called Starboard Custom Printing. Reference number, so they just sent me an invoice. It was invoice number 90356. We have the memo description. Excuse my typos. It's always handy for myself to be able to right-click those. I need that a lot. We then have our original quote for PO, which was $3,000. Our description of the actual expense. We then have our quantity and rate. Let's say it was actually 2 banners, and it was $1,500 a pop. Big banners. So that is then $3,000 marked up by 15%. This came from our estimate. If it didn't exist on our estimate, and we had then the standard markup of 20% would have popped in. Save that. We now have our expense added. So if we navigate back to our job here, and we look at our financials tab, what we're going to see is a good example of a case where we have a time materials job. We've estimated 110 hours. That's coming out to $12,000 of creative services, plus $3,000 of expenses marked up to $3,450. We have 39 hours against this, and there's a cost to our company of $1,100, a billable value of $3,900. We've also purchased all the expenses coming out to $3,450, and we can see that we have not invoiced for anything yet. So we have $3,900 outstanding of creative services and $3,450 outstanding of external expenses. You are going to see this layout very often in the system. For any new users on the webinar today, the concept of estimate, actual, variance, invoice, and plus minus or remainder. This remainder, this plus minus, is the difference between how much you've invoiced and the value of the work that you've done. So you're going to see that all over the system. So from here, we're going to go ahead and we're going to invoice for all the work that we've done. And maybe there's some kind of weird stuff that I got to do in the invoice. I'll talk about the ramifications of that. So up at the top, just like before, we're going to choose to add new invoice. And we're going to choose to invoice based on our actuals. Now I'm going to talk about actuals and remainder from actuals in just a minute. But we're going to invoice based on actuals. What that is basically saying include all of the unbilled time and expenses on this invoice. And notice it's showing me right here. By today's date, the 28th of October, we have 4 uninvoiced timesheets and 1 uninvoiced external expense. If I change this to yesterday, because we entered everything today, there is no time and materials against this as of yesterday. It was all entered today, so therefore our invoice date today has 4 uninvoiced timesheets and 1 uninvoiced external expense. I'm going to leave the billing percentage blank. That makes it default to 100%. The billing percentage is just adjusting, what the value that you're calculating from. Hit add invoice, and that brings us to our created invoice. And notice that our invoice value has filled in the exact amount of the actuals. If I wanted to see what that is, then I can click on the arrow beside the service and look at all of the timesheets. It doesn't matter if you're invoicing based on estimated or actual, you'll still be able to look at the timesheets that are being considered invoiced. Now, if you have a fixed price job for $10,000 and you have $15,000 worth of time against it, and you invoice for just the fixed price of $10,000, then all of those timesheets are now considered billed, and the total value of what they were billed for when you add it all up is, of course, $10,000 because that's what you invoice for. If we're invoicing based on time and materials, we're invoicing based on their actual value. So in this case, we have $3,900 against this. Now, if you start to play with this or manipulate it, there are ramifications to that. So I have $1,800 worth of design. If I choose that, you know what, I really only want to invoice $1,500 for this design time, this is an invoice timesheet. This is, in this case, just one timesheet. You know, of course, I could, if there was more, I could manipulate more of them. But this is, you know, just a single timesheet. And if I override it, it's still a billed timesheet. If I ever do an invoice based on actuals again, it's never going to come up again because I'm invoicing for it. I'm just invoicing for less than what it's worth. If I invoice this timesheet for less than what it's worth, that's going to have ramifications later on when we look at our total actual versus total invoice. If I were to click Save here, I will have invoiced $300 less than the value of the time that's been put in. And if I continued along, by the end of the job, I invoice everything else for the full value. At the end of the day, I will have invoiced for $300 less than the total amount of work. I know this sounds pretty obvious, but we've been having some issues lately, and I hesitate to call it issues. We've been having situations where, you know, clients have been coming to us and agencies have been saying, hey, you know, why does my actual not equal my invoice amount? And we go through, we do a bit of investigation, and then we look and we say, okay, well, here's a timesheet where you only invoice for $1,500. And they'll say, oh, yeah, right. The account executive let me know that, you know, really we weren't able to invoice for that time, so I needed to make an adjustment there. When you make adjustments, which is, you know, totally just based on the real world situations that agencies face, you know, you have to, you know, adapt to situations. But you also need to understand that when you're invoicing for more or less than the value of the work that you're doing, then that has, you know, far-reaching impacts when you're doing a time and materials type job. So it's just something to keep in mind. You know, all of us, I'm sure, every agency on the webinar and, you know, in the world would love to just be able to, you know, say, invoice for all of the time and expenses and save, send it to the client, and they pay it. But that's not always the case, even in time and materials jobs. So you really got to keep in mind that what you're doing has, you know, long-term ramifications later on. So we're going to just leave it at $1,800 here. And actually, you know what? Maybe we're not. Maybe we're not. Let's do something here. Let's take a look. Let's go a bit further. Let's say that we are actually only going to invoice $1,500 for this. It's still a billed timesheet, but we're invoicing for $300 less. Save that, and we now have our time materials invoice. And we invoice for all the time materials, but that one timesheet we invoice for $300 less. And I want to show off, actually, because this has been coming up a lot recently. I want to show off what that means later on. So our invoice is done. We can then produce our client-facing version and go on with our day. So let's jump back to the job here. Notice that our financials tab is showing us that I have, in total, $7,350 worth of actuals, and I've invoiced $7,050 worth of time and expenses. There's a $300 difference there, as I mentioned. So now let's just go ahead and say that we're actually done with the job. Maybe we're not done, but we're ready to do our next invoice. So I'm just going to pop some time in here, and to make the math really simple, I'm going to put 10 hours into design. 10 hours into design is going to come up to $1,000 bucks. So when we refresh the job here, notice now that we now have $1,300 worth of uninvoiced time, and we can actually see that right here, my non-billed timesheets and my billed timesheets. So we can see the non-billed and the billed. Now let's go ahead and say that we want to invoice now for all of the unbilled time and expenses. So up at the top, I'm going to choose to add new invoice. Now notice that it shows me one uninvoiced timesheet. What do we know right now? We know that there's one uninvoiced timesheet for $1,000. We know that the total difference between the actuals and the invoice is $1,300. If I choose actuals here, what that's telling the system is include all of the uninvoiced time and expenses on this invoice. So when I select add, it's going to show me $1,000 because it is invoicing all of the unbilled time and expenses. It's not $1,300. That timesheet was invoiced, but we invoiced it for $300 less. So if we click Save and we go back to the Job Financial tab, we're going to see a difference between our invoice and our actuals of $300. However, if we do it a bit differently, we add our invoice here and we say remainder from actuals, what that is doing is that is telling the system, I want to invoice the full financial difference between our invoiced and our actuals. I'm telling the system, I don't care about whether or not the timesheet was already billed or not. I want the full financial difference between our invoice and our actuals. So when I select Add Invoice, it's showing me $1,300 instead of $1,000. And that is a difference between actuals and remainder from actuals. So you can see that because I manipulated the invoice in the first round, that has ramifications later on. If I didn't manipulate the invoice and I didn't invoice a timesheet for less than what it was worth, then the actuals and remainder from actuals drop down would have done the exact same thing. But because I played around with it, I need to keep my eye on it. So it's just something that, all accountants and AEs and client managers and office managers and everyone who's invoicing out of function point, you got to just keep in mind that what you do is going to affect how you see things later on. In this case, we'll save that, and when we look at the job, we can see that our invoice to actual comparison is 0. That's an important item I wanted to touch on. Probably spent a bit too much time on that specific job or that specific type of invoice, but I think it's important. So if you've seen a couple questions come in, anything that you think we should answer on screen?
You know what? I think the question that was just asked you actually just answered. So
awesome.
That was awesome.
A little bit of clairvoyance there, I guess. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and jump into the retainer invoicing. So we're going to look at retainer, and my example that I'm going to show you is going to be pretty straightforward and simple. And then we're going to jump into the concept of the multi-job invoicing. So we're going to set up a retainer, and the retainer that I'm going to create is going to be really, really basic. And then I'm going to show you a more robust retainer, as I like to call it, that's already been created. So I'm just going to choose to add an estimate. I'm not going to copy this time. I'm going to add an estimate for Great Atlantic Insurance, and I'm just going to call this a great, let's just call it, GAI, Great Atlantic Insurance. I like to put the client info in the job name there, even though their code is GAD for some reason. So Great Atlantic Insurance, monthly, SMM, social media management, retainer. Choose our type. Now I actually have the type of retainer in here. It's not necessarily needing to be there. In this case, I'm actually not going to choose that. I'm going to choose social media because where I'm labeling this job as a retainer is in my category. I'm saying that this is a retainer category billing job. The delivery date for this job is let's say that this retainer goes until the 30th of September, 2016. So this retainer, we're going to bill them this exact same amount every single month. Maybe there is no contract and it'll just go forever, or maybe there is a contract and it ends 1 year later, but it's going to go until the 30th of September, 2016. And this is a really simple retainer here. I'm going to choose, let's see what I want here. Well, there we go. I'm going to choose social media management as my service and submit that. Now, this is a really simple retainer. It's just we're managing the social media for Great Atlantic Insurance, and we expect this to be about 20 hours per month. It is a $2,000 per month retainer. save that. The client approved it, and then we're going to choose to add a job. We've now created a job with an estimated value of $2,000. That is really important. The estimated amount, in the case of a retainer, really should be the value that you bill monthly. Now, if way back, however many thousands of years ago, somebody had decided that, we should have 10 months in a year instead of 12, then it would have been really, really easy to have the estimated amount equal the amount you intend to bill them for the entire year, and then every single time that you do an invoice, you would just do it for 10%. But there are 12 months in the year, and it is impossible to do that as a percentage. So we have a really good way of managing this. Instead of having the estimated amount equal the full amount, the estimated amount equals the amount that we intend to bill monthly. And I'm going to show you 2 examples of this that already exist and are ready to go. But that's the process for setting it up in a simple case where it's just, the estimated amount equals the amount that you intend to bill each month. Now let's take a look at an example that already has some time and some invoices in, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So I'm just going to do a quick job find, and we're going to do it based on category of retainer. And I want to see everything that's open. So retainer and open and find. I think there's like 3 or 4 of them. So I want to look at this one. I want to look at Mac & Co. SEO retainer. So I'm going to click on that, and we're going to look at our financials tab. So I can see that this is a 20-hour, $2,000 monthly retainer. We have 40 hours against this so far in its entire lifespan, and that equals $4,000. We've invoiced for $2,000. I want to see, and let me just check and make sure that this is going to work out, and yes it is. So I want to see, how did this retainer perform in the month of September? So I'm going to, and it's been open just since September 1. So I'm going to put in my date range. I'm going to say from September 1 until September 30th, show me the performance of this retainer. So in the month of September, our 20-hour, $2,000 monthly retainer, we put in 24 hours worth of work, and we invoiced, so we put in 24 hours worth of work, comes up to $2,400. We went over budget by $400, but we only invoiced them the agreed upon amount of $2,000. So there's $400 left that we didn't capture because we went over on the retainer. How are we doing in October? So from October 1 to October 31, I can see that our 20-hour, $2,000 monthly retainer, we've put in 16 hours at $1,600. So we're $400 under budget. There's only a couple days left in the month. We'll see what happens, but we have not invoiced for this yet. So therefore, there's $1,600 outstanding. Invoicing for this is very simple because we've set it up in a way that allows it to be simple. All we need to do is choose Add New Invoice. And then all we need, and I'm going to take the taxes off because I find taxes kind of confused when you see a different total. Even though taxes, of course, are a real-world scenario for most agencies that are using the system, I like to take them off in demonstrations because I want the numbers to be nice and even, just for demonstration purposes. So I'm going to take that off. But all we need to do is hit Add Invoice and then click Add Invoice on this page. It's going to default to be 100% of the value of the estimate. And because we've set up the job to have an estimated amount that equals what we invoice every single month, I can see that my invoice is automatically generated for my $2,000. Produce my client-facing version and move on. And now when we look at our Mac & Co. SEO retainer, and we can see that in total, for its entire lifespan, we actually are now completely evened out. So we've put in 40 hours, come up to $4,000. It's been 2 months, so we've invoiced for $4,000, and that exactly matches the amount that of the work that we've done. So our balance is 0. But upon further investigation, I can see that as we looked before, September 1 went over budget, October 1, or the month of September went over budget, October 1 to October 31, the current month, we have $400 left in the budget, 20 hours in the month, 16 actual, So there's $400 left in the budget. We need to spend, less than, well, ideally we'd spend no more time because we went over last month. But if we want to stay in budget this month, we can't spend more than 4 hours working on their SEO for the next couple days, or we're going to end up over budget again. So that's how we can look at their performance on a month-by-month basis. Now, if we want to look at this in a more robust way, and we're not going to go too deep into it, but I want to show it off real quick. This is a really, really simple retainer. You might have retainers that are significantly more complex, or I called it once in a meeting a robust retainer, and that word has really stuck. I get made fun of it. I get made fun of for it all the time. There we go. So if we take a look at an example of that, I have a project here called Safeway Retainer. And this project is a large retainer. It is a $10,000 monthly retainer for a year, total budget of $120,000. When we look at our financials, I can see that our Safeway monthly retainer has a $100 per month, $10,000 per month retainer. And so far, because it's only been a couple months, so far all we worked on was some entrance signs, a redesign of the flyer, and a new website for the rewards program. Those are the 3 jobs we've worked on. Now, if they call us up tomorrow and say, hey, we need another web page added for something else, then we would add another job to this project, and it would just be for the purpose of tracking time, managing tasks, and perhaps even putting expenses against those as well, if it's applicable. But I have my billing job, and that equals the amount I bill every month. And then if I want to see, just like before, how did this perform in September, September 1 to September 30th, I can see that our 100-hour, $10,000 monthly retainer, we put in 112 hours at $12,000. We went $2,000 over budget. We invoiced for $10,000, and therefore we lost out on $2,000. And I can see that we spent a lot of time on this flyer redesign. We spent 52 hours in the month of September. Where did we spend that time? We put a bunch into design. That's probably, where we went over budget is in the design aspect of the flyer redesign, and I can see that number is higher than I think it should be. And then, of course, we'd look at October, and when it's time to invoice this, all we would do is choose to invoice our Safeway monthly retainer billing job, which equals the amount that we intend to bill every month. We follow the exact same process I showed off a minute ago. I'm just invoicing 100% of the estimate. So you can see that the way that we set these things up initially really impacts the ability to invoice them later on. Now we're going to take a look at the concept of invoicing multiple jobs all at the same time. And there's a few different purposes and reasonings for this. So let's say that we're invoicing all of our time and materials jobs. So, my agency, in my demonstration here, my example agency that I'm managing, we have retainer jobs, we have time materials, we have fixed price, we have all the above. We have a bunch of fixed price jobs, and we like to bill them at the end of every month. I know that I'm describing a perfect world scenario for those time materials jobs. That isn't always the case. Sometimes you might have an agreement with the client where when you reach a certain milestone upon delivery, then you are able to bill for the value of the time that you spent. So it's not always cut and dry. It's not always, bill all the unbilled time and expenses at the end of the month. But for the purpose of this example, I'm going to show you a case where we're just, we're billing all the unbilled time and expenses at the end of the month. So the way that I would do that is up at the top, I would do a job find. And I would say, I want to see all the jobs that are time materials. And I want to see all the jobs that are open. And I can narrow it down by anything else, but in this case, I just want to see open time materials jobs. Click Find, and that produces the results of our search. You can see here that I put in the job category when I was kind of organizing this a little bit before the webinar. I'm going to take that out real quick, and then we're going to talk about that, actually, in just a second. But this is going to be the default view of what you're getting here. So this is what you're going to see. So this is showing me, the client it's for, the name of the job, the type, the status, the due dates, estimated actual variance, how much we've invoiced, and then the value here, of course, comparing what we've invoiced to our actuals. When you see a negative number, that is letting you know you have invoiced less than the value of the work that you have done. So if we were to just invoice all of these for the time materials, we'd invoice this one $1,200, this one $225, this one, and so forth, and so on. And then when you see a 0, it is of course letting us know that we have invoiced the exact amount of the time and expenses. Or if you were to see a positive number, then we would have invoiced more than the value of the time and expenses. Probably not going to see that in the case of time and materials jobs. That's more of a fixed price job thing. So you're not really going to see that very often in this example that we're talking about. But let's say that we want to go ahead and we want to invoice all of these jobs for all of the unbilled time and expenses all at the same time, and we want to have that done in a couple seconds or a couple minutes at the most. So up at the top, I'm going to choose Batch Invoice Add. It's going to ask me, well, we'll give it a name. I usually give the name and the date, so I'd call this like T&M, Time Materials, October 28th. And we're going to invoice this based on actuals. Now here's the kicker. Notice actuals and remainder from actuals. So you have to make a choice about how you operate your time materials billing. If you're constantly going in and manipulating the value of timesheets and expenses and invoicing more or less than, I shouldn't say manipulating the value of timesheets because it's actually not what you're doing. Invoicing for more or less than the value of what the timesheets and expenses are worth, then you just have to be cognizant of that. It has to be something that you're aware of the fact that you're doing that. And if you are aware of it, then you're going to understand that when you choose actuals, it's calculating all the value of all of the unbilled time and expenses. If you have expenses that have been time and expenses that have been billed, but they have not been billed for the value that they were worth, they were billed for some other value that you came up with based on a conversation with the client or what you thought it should have been worth or whatever it is, then you have a chance of things not adding up at the end of the day when you look at total actual versus total invoice. If that's something that you never do, then you never have to worry about it. Just choose actuals. You just have to keep these things in mind, that if you're doing a lot of manipulation of the values of the invoices, but you still consider it time materials, then there are ramifications to that. But in this case, we're going to choose actuals, and we're going to hit Add Batch Invoice. This next page is really just asking you around, basically the details that you just entered, maybe an overall description, that type of stuff. Then we're going to hit Next, Add Jobs to Batch. You very rarely need to make any adjustments on this page. We then have all of our jobs. Now, you'll notice here that we can see all the amounts that we were just looking at. And sometimes I might even like to have this other page open in like a different tab and just look and kind of see what we're going to end up with. But what I would do is I'd come in here and I would say Add All. And that is going to generate an invoice, and this invoice column right here is about to pop in with all these values. Generates an invoice for the value of the unbilled time and expenses. Now that was quick and easy because I just hit Add All, but I don't want a $0 invoice for online survey invitation, so I'm going to get rid of that. And then I don't want, and notice that the dollar amount went away, or the dollar figure. I don't want a $0 invoice for display for Galaxy Notes, so I'm going to get rid of that. And I don't want an invoice for new car lot banners because it's already equaling the total amount, so I'm going to get rid of that too. So we now have all of our invoices, and they're all just based on time materials. If I click Finish Adding to Batch, I can move on. But I know that mall brochure job, this one job, there's some weird stuff that happened on it, and unfortunately, I can't invoice the client for $42.75. I can only invoice them for $3,500. Or there's some timesheets in there that don't make sense or something like that. So I need to edit this one. So I'm just going to choose to edit this invoice, and it brings up the exact same invoice edit page that you have when you do an individual invoice. You just get to do it right from here for all the jobs really quickly. This whole batching invoicing thing, when you get the hang of it, it is a huge time saver. You know, I mean, if I was actually managing my own agency through the system and I didn't work with Function Point, I would do all of my invoicing via the batch, even my fixed price, and I would just manipulate each one from this page because it's such a huge time saver. But then I can come in here and I say, you know, I know that we spent way too much time in production, so I'm just going to come in here and say, you know, we really can't invoice for these timesheets right now. Maybe we'll look at them later, but for now, I'm just going to take these off, make some edits, you know, save and close, and that then affects the timesheet or the invoice value. So you can make any adjustments to any of these jobs right from here. Click Finish Adding to Batch, and that just generated however many it was, like 15 or 20 invoices. And I can look at the batch, and I can see all of them. And then there's, you know, a bunch of different things that I can do here. I can produce printouts for every single invoice, save them, and then send them to my client myself. Or up at the top, I can hit Notify Selected, and the system will send an email from you to your client with whatever content you want. You know, first name and last name is going to fill in the name of that client. Invoice number, who it was created by. You can fill in all of these different details. You can choose different templates. You know, FP invoice attached. You know, you can do all this really cool stuff around the email, and then send it out. None of the emails actually exist. They're all fake, so I'm not going to click send. But you can then send all those emails out, and then all of those clients then get all their invoices. That's actually how we do our billing at Function Point, and it is highly effective. So that is the process for doing the batch invoicing for time and materials. And I've seen some questions popping in. I should check in. Sophie, anything that you think that we should address on screen?
You know what? There's some really awesome questions coming in right now, but I think I got it. Thanks for checking in, though. Yeah,
no problem. So we only have a few minutes left. I want to talk a bit more about batch invoicing, and also some of the job find stuff. So another thing that batch invoicing is really useful for is where you are able to invoice a predetermined amount. Now, the most common scenario of that is going to be a retainer. So every single month I'm invoicing a set amount, and I know what that amount is. So I might do a job find, and this is something that you're going to do. You know, if you have a lot of retainers and you bill them the same amount every month, then you're going to do this most likely on the last day of the month or the first day of the month, or maybe you do it on the, you know, the 6th of the month because you didn't get around to it, but you do the invoice date for the 1st. So, but typically it's going to be, you know, the 1st or the last day. And we're going to do a job find, and I'm going to say, show me all of my retainers that are open. Now you can multi-select for the statuses here if you need to. But show me all of my retainers that are open. Click Find. And I have 4. So I know that that makes it pretty easy for me because I only have 4. You know, you might have a lot more, but then I can easily invoice this. Now, the concept of retainers, I have a lot of agencies tell me, you know, all the time that their retainers are nowhere near as simple as what we're talking about. You know, I've seen a lot of different stuff going on with retainers. A common thing is someone will say to me, you know, we have a retainer with a client where it's $10,000 a month, but, you know, at the end of the month, if we put in $8,000 worth of work, then we bill them for $8,000. And if we put in $12,000 of work, then we bill them $12,000. And really, that's not really a retainer. It's basically a time and materials contract where there's an agreed upon goal for the amount. If you're constantly adjusting the invoice based on what you actually did, not really a retainer. Although I totally understand that you might have an agreement with a client that they've signed off where the word retainer is involved, and you might actually label that as a retainer as your billing category. But you know, keep in mind that it's not really a true retainer because you're not billing the exact amount that you agreed upon. Something that was taught to me by the late great Tony Mikes at Second Wind was a really, really good way of thinking about retainers. Is that you should have an agreement with your client that you're going to do an evaluation of the retainer at maybe, you know, the first 3 months and then every 6 months after that. And you know, you're going to bill them, you know, $10,000 every month, And if after 3 months, the first 3 months of that relationship, you see that you are consistently only doing $6,000 worth of work, then reevaluate the retainer. If you see that you are consistently doing $16,000 worth of work, then reevaluate the retainer. And then if it looks like it's good, then just keep going. And after every 6 months, use Function Point, generate the reports, and show your client, hey, this is what we're spending every single month. And if it deviates from what you're billing, then have a conversation with them. But the more standardized and streamlined you can make this retainer invoicing, the easier your life is going to be. And if you have a retainer situation, and I've seen this before, where you have a client that says, okay, well, you can bill us $10,000 for October, $2,000 for November, $25,000 for December, and so on and so forth, then that's just something that you need to have an understanding on, so that every time you go to generate an invoice, you manipulate the value for what you need to bill that each month. But in a case where you can bill a set amount every month, it's really, really easy. All you do is you pull up the list of retainers, you hit Batch Invoice Add, call it Retainer October 28, and then just hit Add Batch Invoice, because you're just invoicing 100% of estimate. That's the default. You just hit Add All. You're just going through the motions, because everything is already set up to create these invoices for their amounts. So when you look at that batch, you're invoicing them for the exact amount that each one is supposed to be invoiced for every single month. And then of course you can choose to notify the client. If there's no contact, of course there's no one to email. So you might want to have a job contact if you're going to use that, or you can produce the PDFs, save each of them, and then email them to your clients, manually if you wish. The very last thing I want to talk about really quickly in the last 2 minutes here is the concept of batch invoicing for fixed price. If I do a job find based on category of fixed price and it's a status of open, I'm going to have a bunch of jobs here in my system. We're mostly a fixed price agency. So I have 15 jobs here that are fixed price. And, in a lot of these cases, the agencies I speak with where they're billing based on fixed price, it's usually based on some sort of agreed upon deliverable. So it's like, okay, when we get sign off on, the first version of the website, before revision round 2, we're going to invoice you this, the third 25%. We'll invoice you the final 25% upon final launch of the website. That type of thing. And when it's that type of situation, it's really difficult to have an easy automated batch invoicing process, because they're all different. You're invoicing them at different percentages at different times for different reasons. So, for myself, what I would do, and this is a bit more of an advanced user kind of tactic, but what I would probably do is I would look at these jobs and I would ask my AEs to come in here and update, what can I bill for this? Put in, you can invoice 2,500, when ready. And then I'm just looking at a report then telling me, what I can invoice for each of these jobs. So as the person coming in and doing the billing, I might choose to, maybe customize my list a little bit. I'm gonna manage these columns. I'm gonna take out some stuff I don't need. I'm gonna put in some stuff that I do want. So I want my date description in there that I was just customizing. I'm gonna drag that over, and then maybe I'll add it, subtract some columns I need or don't need, and so forth. And then all I'm going to do is I'm just going to generate a report, and that report is then showing me, at the end of the month, okay, you can invoice 2,500 when ready. And I'm going to have this report telling me all the jobs, what I can invoice from them. It comes from my account managers, telling me exactly what I can do. And then I'm just going to have this report kind of off in my other monitor. I like to use 2 monitors. So I'm going to have this report off to the side here. And as I have it off to the side, I'm going to do a batch invoice. and then I have all of those jobs listed. And I look at my report, and it says, okay, for job 30290, for the employee handbook and training guide, you can invoice $2,500 when ready. So, and maybe that's a certain percentage. So I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to, go down the list. Here's my employee training and handbook guide. I'm going to add that in, and then I'm going to generate the invoice for the amount that I need. So I'm going to put this in at 20%, and get my 2,500 and save and close. Fill in my account there. It should be filled in automatically. Save and close. I now have one invoice for 2,500, and I would do all of my billing like this. But if you're just starting out and you're just getting used to the function point system, probably best to do them one by one until you kind of get into a rhythm. But the whole concept of the batch invoicing is highly effective if you have the information on hand for what you can and cannot invoice for each of these jobs. So just something to think about. The first part of this webinar was looking at invoicing those jobs individually, one by one, for fixed price, time, materials, and retainers. And that's probably how you want to do it while you're just getting used to the system. And then as you get a bit more comfortable, you can look at the concept of doing things in a batch. So we're over by 3 minutes. My old co-presenter, Emma, would probably be like waving at me right now, like, demanding that I end this thing soon. I can see Sophie sitting there contently. I'm sure she'll give you a bit of grief for it afterwards. But I can see that there's a couple questions that came in. Sophie, anything you think I should address at this time?
No, again, I think you really went into some great detail today, Mark. So thank you for that.
No problem. I hope I didn't go into too much detail on that final point of the batch invoicing for fixed price, because it's not usually something I show and not usually something that I really get into. But I wanted to show it today because I thought we had the time, and it's really how I would probably work the system myself if I was managing an agency. And I do actually see a lot of people doing that. It really just depends on how used you are, how used to the system you are, and how confident you feel in doing that and not doing them one by one. So I want to thank everybody for the webinar today and for joining in. I really appreciate all of your time. I'm going to run a quick poll just to see how valuable everyone found this webinar. So please feel free to be honest. If you found this valuable, great. If you didn't, totally understand. And if you do have any suggestions, any requests, or you want to talk about the webinar at all, feel free to email success@functionpoint.com. Again, that's success@functionpoint.com, and that will come to Sophia and myself. And if you have any feedback or requests for new topics later on, or different ways you think we could do this, or if you think I just talk too fast, or you don't like my voice, or something like that, feel free, let me know, and we'll look at ways that we can improve. And just to let everybody know, we are looking at some new topics that we're going to be running for the next cycle coming up, most likely starting in the early new year. So if you do have some requests for topics, now would actually be the good time to be sending those in. So feel free to send those my way. And again, I really appreciate everyone's time. As of right now, the next webinar is scheduled for the 25th of November. Same bat time, same bat channel. So if you're registered for that webinar, I look forward to seeing you then. And otherwise, we're going to keep this thing running for the next few minutes. If any other questions do pop in that we can answer, and then we'll close it down once we see people starting to file out. So again, I want to thank everybody for their time today, and have yourselves a great rest of your Wednesday. Be safe this Halloween. Have a good time. Eat a bunch of candy. It's on a Saturday, so feel free to let loose. I know that I will. And and you know what? If you want to, go on the Function Point Facebook page and maybe share your office Halloween costumes. We would think that would be so cool. I know that we'll be sharing ours. So I'm hoping to be able to get my costume all set up. I know what I'm going to be. I'm not going to tell you, but I'm hoping to have it all set up and ready to go. So yeah, go on our Facebook page and show us your office, all your costumes that you guys put together. We would love to see that. I think that'd be really cool. So again, thanks everyone. Have yourself a great Wednesday, great rest of your week, and happy Halloween.